very relevant, very current, will be about 45 minutes. Following the seminar, we'll go ahead and we'll open the floor for questions. So if you have any, please just know that you'll be able to ask them, okay? Thank you so much. And then you'll open with prayer when you get a chance. That's great already.
Okay, so this is still an important topic, although less important than what we talked about earlier. It was kind of interesting. I remember seeing hearing about a political debate when the Afghanistan issue was happening and we were withdrawing from Afghanistan. And there were some deaths that occurred over that situation, and one of our Weimar students at Weimar University was hearing one of the news media organizations state that really we shouldn't be focusing in on Afghanistan on a few deaths when there's all these deaths from COVID every day. And the Weimar University student said, but we've never focused in on the deaths from heart disease and cancer anywhere close to COVID. So news media, you're not majoring in majors like you think you are in regards to this. But still, COVID is significant. It has been associated with over 700,000 deaths in the United States and the U.S. territories, and it will be close to 800,000 pretty soon. As you can see, the economic cost of COVID was significant in 2019. The U.S. borrowed a little less than $1 trillion as the economy was improving. But when COVID broke, the debt is now over $27.5 trillion, and the USA today is borrowing $15 billion a day. Those are the economic responses to COVID and some of the other things as well. So I'm going to see if we could find Erica, because we need her to help advance our slides here. And maybe there is a clicker around here too. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So COVID and mental health are also tightly connected, or we should say mental illness. The Journal of the American Medical Association reported large-scale increase in anxiety and depression during COVID. Substance abuse, alcohol use, and marijuana use actually increased significantly under COVID. Some people were consuming more alcohol because they thought alcohol was a disinfectant that would prevent them from getting COVID as they were using it on their hands, and also thinking it would help in regards to their getting it orally as well. But of course, alcohol suppresses the immune system. Loneliness is at an all-time high, in part due to social distancing and people just being at home. Not willing to get out of their environment, or actually even their kids and grandkids not willing to come over, fearful that they're going to spread it. And of course, the most severe punishment we can give a prisoner is solitary confinement. And so this hasn't been healthy for mental health. Domestic violence actually went up considerably with everyone being sent home. Child abuse went up. And technology addiction was a major problem pre-COVID. Do you think that's worsened or improved during COVID? It actually has worsened considerably as people are just spending all sorts of more time on their screens, and suicide risk has also gone up. A Gallup poll of Americans during COVID stated that Americans believe that COVID has more adversely affected their mental health, even worse than its effects physically, financially. Gallup stated emotional well-being is being attacked at a stronger rate than ever before in human history. And so this is indeed a crisis, not only because of all of the deaths, but all of the complications of it, including the mental health complications. Somehow what's been lost in all of this is how COVID originated. There are 7 species of coronavirus that infect humans, and all of them came originally from animal sources. The first deadly strain, called SARS-1, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome, emerged in southern China in 2002, quickly spread to 28 countries, over 8,000 people infected, 800 people died, 10% mortality rate by July of 2003. Fortunately, it was able to be contained after that, and it was detected and responded to far more quickly than the SARS-2. SARS-1, it's very clear, it came from horseshoe bats to civet cats, which were sold at a wet market, and then to humans. The Middle East respiratory syndrome, another coronavirus, started in Saudi Arabia in 2012. Almost all of the nearly 2,500 cases have been in people who live in or travel to the Middle East. This coronavirus, fortunately, is far less contagious than its SARS cousin, but is significantly more deadly, killing 858 people, which is a 34% mortality rate. And it has the same respiratory symptoms, but also causes kidney failure. And this went from bats to camels, and then to humans. Then along came SARS-2. SARS-2 actually came from bats to humans either directly or via pangolins, who have also had SARS-2, the scaly anteaters, which are sold in wet markets, found to harbor SARS-2. And the interesting thing about these epidemics is virtually every one of these epidemics that goes rapidly from human to human actually was contracted first by eating not just meat, but a type of meat called unclean meat. And if we look at other epidemics, it has that same characteristic. The influenza virus of 1918, the source was pig. The HIV that's killed literally tens of millions of people around the world and globe started from either eating or having sexual relations with monkey. We even know where in the world it started from and how it went from monkey to human. Ebola, which killed many, came from bats. Bats also known as an unclean animal. And it's true, if you eat a clean animal, you obviously can die from eating that clean animal. But if you eat an unclean animal, thousands to millions can die. And this is one of the reasons why God, in trying to protect humanity, stated this: to make a difference between the unclean and the clean, and between the beasts that may be eaten and the beasts that what? May not be eaten. I was on an airplane with a CDC official, infectious disease official, happened to sit next to them, And I was going through these facts with him, and interestingly, he hadn't put it together until I actually started to go through it all, and he says, you know, you're right, and he was trying to find exceptions and things. He says, you're right, it all starts from unclean meat. And I said, why don't we educate the world about this? And he says, you know, I think the reason why it's not educated is because it might give some focus on the biblical instructions, and science today doesn't want to have anything to do with the Bible. Are we really going to allow the next epidemic to occur readily because we don't want to have science do something with the Bible? Have our prejudices gotten so severe in so-called science that we're willing to allow the next epidemic to occur with tens of millions of people involved because we don't want to tell them the facts about where this came from? What many people don't realize is without the Bible, we wouldn't even have science. Because the first prospective controlled epidemiological trial ever done in human history was from Daniel chapter 1. That's how we learned the scientific method. And science actually started. Even Harvard, which is known to be very scientifically rigorous, it started out as unapologetically biblical and uncompromisingly scientific, and it's one of the reasons why the science was so good. This idea that you can't have the Bible if you have science is just nonsensical. And it actually is very apropos to be both unapologetically biblical and uncompromisingly scientific. You can have both. And I think if we had both, we'd probably be able to avoid the next epidemic far more readily. Because we don't seem to be learning our lesson. We're spending trillions and trillions of dollars on this disease. And not spending a whole lot of money in preventing the next epidemic or even educating the next epidemic. It could start with education first, and then it could start with enforcement. You know, some people say, well, you know, for instance, in California, we have laws against arson. Significant laws, because at the dry season, there can be, you know, all sorts of homes burned down and people can die and things like that. And they even track down where the fire started from and all of that. And if you happen to be the person that started that fire, it's going to be significant consequences for you. And just because there's more fires doesn't mean we need to get rid of the arson laws and say, well, there's going to be arsons anyways. If you can actually track down the actual individual that contracted the virus first and then spread it to millions of people, they're probably, once they're educated, there should be consequences, and that can also be a deterrent to the next epidemic out there. But nonetheless, the World Health Organization has stated now that lockdowns are not the answer. They've stated that they make poor people poor. World poverty has more than doubled since lockdowns began. And this is the WHO now stating lockdowns never should be the what? Primary method due to the serious financial and life-threatening health problems they cause. You know, during lockdowns, for instance, I know not too far away from here, south of here, there's a country called New Zealand, and they've been some of the most severe in regards to lockdowns, and of course they haven't been able to prevent the disease, they just flattened the curve. But it was kind of interesting that the last lockdown they had, they even stopped vaccinations because they were fearful that of getting out and about in regards to the lockdown. And what happens during lockdowns is people that are developing cancer symptoms can't get their tests done, colonoscopies and others. So we're just a narrow focus on COVID and not looking at the global picture. But in trying to look at more of the global picture, this was also CDC data showing comorbidities are significant. It looked at all of the data in 2020, and also the COVID deaths. And it was looking at death certificates. And in the United States, when you sign a death certificate, it tells what the cause of death was, but then underneath it talks about what caused that and then what caused that, up to 4 layers. And they found by looking at the COVID death certificates that only 6% of death certificates were actually due to COVID alone. The rest were due to comorbidities. And the original study showed overweight and obesity being the #1 comorbidity in regards to the number of deaths, hypertension #2, diabetes #3, dementia #4, atherosclerosis or coronary artery disease #5, and chronic lower respiratory disease #6. Those were all of the 2020 death certificates. But it was just looking at those death certificates. What we found out is some doctors were so busy they just put COVID, and they didn't look, they didn't have time to put the other conditions there, so it may have been even more or less than 6% that was COVID alone. So missing data regarding how many were actually overweight or obese. And so the limitation was based on what doctors decide to include, and of course their time limitations in filling out the actual causes. But there was a study that was seen as more impressive than this, where we actually looked at hospital data on those that were admitted to the hospital. And this included all the way, it was published in July of 2021, so it included 2021 data. And this is taking a look at the history and physicals of those, and the CDC also has this on their website as well. And when someone's admitted to the hospital, they're much more likely to have comorbidities mentioned, in part due to the fact that the DRGs, or Medicare, actually pay for a case mix. So if it's more complex, they'll pay more money. And so the practitioners are very good at determining what other comorbidities are on the line, because it actually helps with the financial bottom line. So this is going to be more accurate. And they found out 94.9% had at least one documented underlying comorbidity, and 46% of the COVID hospitalizations were being admitted to the intensive care unit. And the top underlying conditions when people got COVID and then got sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, #1 was hypertension. So high blood pressure, that ACE2 receptor, it binds onto and spreads more when we have that high blood pressure. Interestingly, high cholesterol and high triglycerides were #2. That's also a comorbidity that's going to increase your risk if you get COVID of ending up in the hospital. Obesity was #3, diabetes #4, and coronary artery disease was #5. So that was getting COVID and being admitted to the hospital. So we know these comorbidities are very important in regards to outcomes and how severe it's going to be. But then they took a look. There were obviously those that actually went ahead and, despite all the hospital treatment, ended up dying in the intensive care unit or in the hospital. And so they looked at the strongest risk factor for death. And the strongest risk factor by a hair was obesity. The second strongest risk factor, which surprised them, was anxiety. Anxiety, notice, didn't even end up on the first 5 as far as being admitted to the hospital. It was way down the line. And so there was a lot less people that had anxiety. But if they had anxiety, they were much more likely to succumb to the COVID virus in the hospital setting. And many of these were not obese, and they didn't have other comorbid conditions. This underscores the importance of what we call neuroimmunology. Anxiety suppresses the immune system. And interestingly, those who are most concerned about contracting COVID and trying to avoid it and are highly anxious, when they do get it, they're much more likely to succumb than individuals who are not so anxious about it. And so anxiety is really something that, that is of importance for us to be able to manage our emotions. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy and other anxiety measures come in. Third is diabetes, the strongest risk factor for death. And then fourth were patients with multiple conditions. Now, this has to be clarified a little bit because there were some individuals who had like 10 comorbid conditions. If you had 10 comorbid conditions, that's even higher than obesity alone as far as and so the more comorbid conditions you have, the far greater the risk of succumbing. And in reality, the answer to COVID, when we look at this data, because there is no way, this is one of the things that we're kind of, I think a lot of people are still fooled about. They think if we're just careful enough, and if we're just restrictive enough, and if we just lock down, and we just do those things, that somehow we're going to be able to eliminate this disease. That is not true. This disease is spreading. It is going. Right now, 1 out of 7 Americans have gotten it that's documented. We know there's a lot more that have gotten it that are not documented that they have it. And it's very clear that within a rather short period of time, the majority of Americans will have come across COVID. And so with that looming, in front of us, there's never been a time in human history where New Start is more important. Because the answer to this epidemic is actually New Start, the things that will help improve our odds when we come across this. And so, and by the way, the answer on this also, if you were to get the vaccine, turns out to be New Start as well. It's not just for those who are unvaccinated that have to do New Start. Let me show you what an atherosclerotic plaque looks like. An atherosclerotic plaque has, in this yellow area, in those crystals, notice it says cholesterol crystals, and it says fat in there. If we were to open up your arteries, for those of you who have not been following New Start, we're going to see these plaques, and we're going to see these cholesterol crystals. The body tries to protect you from it so it doesn't thrombose by forming this smooth muscle layer around it. And then on top of that is that fibrous cap. So if we did an angiogram, we might see, a 20 or 30% blockage. Our vessels are more than double the size they need to be, so 20 or 30%, you may not even have any symptoms from that. Even if you're out doing a marathon, you wouldn't have symptoms of that. And so a lot of people have asymptomatic atherosclerosis, but that fibrous cap can ulcerate. And what causes the ulceration is called inflammation. Inflammation, whatever the cause of inflammation, when inflammatory markers go up, you will be at risk for that fibrous cap ulcerating. And when it ulcerates, there's a bunch of platelets that come in, and pretty soon that blood vessel goes from 30% blocked to 100% blocked in a matter of a few minutes. How does this play a role? What is happening, you notice coronary artery disease on there. What is happening is some patients are coming in with COVID and wondering if they have it, but they don't have really bad symptoms, but they're getting tested there in the emergency room. And then all of a sudden, they have this heart attack in the emergency room. They could even die from the heart attack. When they die from the heart attack, what is the death going to be called? It's going to be called a COVID death. But interestingly, if they got vaccinated and had a heart attack death within 48 hours, which is what happened to Hank Aaron. Hank Aaron got vaccinated, and I think it was within 24. It was certain within 48. He was in Atlanta actually televising himself getting vaccinated so that people could feel comfortable. Since the home run star is getting vaccinated, we can feel comfortable getting vaccinated. And within 48 hours, he was dead from a massive heart attack. What was stated was unrelated. Now, based on what I've told you, you might have to think a little bit. Do you think that was related or unrelated? Why was it related? Because the vaccine also causes inflammation. By design, it causes inflammation. We want you to have inflammation when you get the vaccine because you're building up antibodies to the spike protein that mRNA is making. And if you have advanced atherosclerosis, you are at risk for having a stroke and heart attack within a short period of time after you get the vaccine. So some individuals have asked me, you know, should they get vaccinated? And I had a friend of mine who's actually a nurse practitioner at Ardmore, Oklahoma, and was there where I practiced for a number of years. And at potluck, he came over to me and he says, I haven't gotten vaccinated yet. And he says, should I get vaccinated? I had a stent put in my coronaries last year. This is my cholesterol level. It's 280. My triglycerides are 600. Should I get vaccinated? I said, you should get vaccinated, but not now. You need to go on New Start. You need to actually stabilize all of the plaques that you have. And you need to take some time to do this. And he wasn't on the healthiest diet, obviously. He wasn't following that program. And so what we're not telling people, whether they get the vaccine or not, is how important a New Start is to be on before you introduce something that's going to cause inflammation in your body. And I think this message needs to go out. It's very important for individuals to understand that so they don't become, quotes, a unrelated statistic. By the way, I knew from the very beginning, you know, I had to make decisions in regards to the vaccine myself, and I knew I was going to be asked about it. So I looked at that original Pfizer study. And one of the things I realized, of course, one of the things that entered my mind, I'm sure it's entered a lot of people's mind, is could they have fudged the data? But I knew they couldn't afford to fudge the data because the chickens were going to come home to roost very clearly. And so I had to trust the data. But they were saying that there were these unrelated deaths. There was about 5 of them in the vaccinated group that died within 48 hours, and they said it was unrelated. And I wanted to read the fine print. What did they actually die from? Was it an auto accident? Auto accident, probably unrelated. But it wasn't an auto accident. It was exactly what this is. It was heart attacks and strokes. It was from that ulcerated fibrous cap. And so I realized right away, these are not unrelated deaths. We have to factor that into that whole equation. And when we factored it in the whole equation, it still came out favorably that the vaccine would protect, but we want to get the benefits without the risks. And there is risk when we are vaccinating massive parts of the population without telling them to get healthy enough first to not have this happen. So nutrition, as we go through New Start, high antioxidant foods, whole plant foods, eaten unrefined, getting plenty of vitamin C, which is immune enhancing and which is an antioxidant. Vitamin C is something they're even allowed to give you when you come into the hospital with COVID. I know in our hospital, everyone with COVID gets vitamin C because of its potentially protective effect. Why not have that vitamin C already on board before you come across COVID? These are foods that are high in vitamin C. And then there are some very high foods such as broccoli, sweet green bell pepper, oranges, kiwi, strawberries, even higher than oranges. A lot of people don't realize that. Pink and red grapefruit, also higher than oranges. Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts have so much vitamin C. By the way, when we cook food, we destroy half of the vitamin C. But Brussels sprouts have so much vitamin C that even when they're cooked, they have more than citrus. We have orange juice quite a bit, but sweet red bell pepper is even higher than orange juice. Zinc is also important. Zinc actually helps to suppress or shut down the replication of multiple viruses, not just COVID, the flu virus, and et cetera. It's been shown to help RSV, rhinovirus, and the common cold viruses as well. And so getting zinc is important. What foods have zinc? Highest foods are actually your legumes, baked beans, adzuka beans, even tofu is very high in zinc. Katjung beans also. Lentils are a moderate source, as are chickpeas or garbanzos, and white beans, lupin beans, and black-eyed peas are a good source. Then there are seeds and nuts that are high in zinc. Hemp seed is the highest source at 9 milligrams per just 3-ounce serving. Pumpkin seeds are very high as well. Pine nuts, cashews, and sunflower seeds are all tied for about the same amount per 3-ounce serving. And then there's also some in pecans and chia, Brazil nuts, and almonds. Moving on to exercise, there's more we could say about nutrition, but we would also want to have the absence of cholesterol, the absence of things that are high in saturated fat that increase our liver's production of cholesterol, so that's the advantage of the plant-based diet. But physical exercise is also crucially important, particularly exercise in the outdoor air. And I think Ellen White summed it pretty well here when she said morning exercise and walking in the free, invigorating air of heaven, or cultivating flowers, small fruits, and vegetables, is necessary to a healthful circulation of the blood. It is the surest safeguard against colds, coughs, congestions of the brains and lungs, inflammation of the liver, the kidney, and the lungs, and a what? 100 other diseases. And so this is something that we need to put in our daily routine. A lot of people give the excuse that they don't exercise because they don't have what? They don't have time. But actually, that's been looked at, and we find out that those people that say they don't have time, they actually have, on average, 4.5 hours of free time per day. And that doesn't include playing with your children, you know, getting food ready, eating, work time, any of that. But the average individual that says, I don't have time, has 4.5 hours of free time per day. And where do you think most of that time is spent in those 4.5 hours? It's on screens, and it's on devices. They've also done a study to show, and we'll get to rest. Rest is also important in sleep. But as far as your health is concerned, and your neuroimmunology is based on BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, when we take a look at BDNF levels will go down if you're not exercising. They'll also go down if you're not getting enough sleep. But which one of those two do you think is more important? Sleep, getting an hour more of sleep, or getting an hour less of sleep and exercising for that hour? They've actually looked at that, and it's actually healthier for you to get one less hour of sleep and use that to exercise. So if you think, hey, I'm not in that 4.5-hour status, I really don't have time, well then get up an hour early and get your exercise in the morning. It will help your health in a lot of different ways. The W is, of course, staying well hydrated, but also contrast hydrotherapy is helpful. This was a study that was done back in the flu epidemic, showing an 85% reduction in pneumonia for those who contracted the flu and underwent contrast hydrotherapy. That's heat, along with some cold mitten friction and going back to the heat. And a similar reduction in death rates. The medical examiner of the county that was looking at this data said the record is remarkable. It makes the ordinary methods of dealing with the flu appear irrational. We have also just completed a Weimar, it was at Weimar Institute at the time, it's now Weimar University, but hydrotherapy for COVID patients. And we've had some very serious cases at Weimar, but we've never had a person that has needed hospitalization once we started the hydrotherapy treatment. So everyone at Weimar who might come across it gets the hydrotherapy, and remarkable healing. We're actually going to be publishing a study that we did jointly with Southern Adventist University on that. Vitamin D from the sun is also critically important. It modulates both innate immunity and adaptive immunity. And vitamin D, when you look at it, is kind of like a steroid. And in the hospital setting, they have found out that if you're admitted with COVID pneumonia, you actually do better if you get a smaller amount of a steroid to prevent what's called the cytokine storm. But if you get admitted and you have vitamin D levels, you already have that immunomodulation from that vitamin D. And vitamin D, low vitamin D levels have been shown to be very connected with more respiratory infections. Taking vitamin D supplements have been shown to lower respiratory infections. But despite the fact that supplements are helpful, studies are clear that no supplement is as beneficial as getting your vitamin D up from sunlight. So that's one of the advantages you have in this great island of Guam, is the fact that if you get out in direct enough sun, and it doesn't take much sun exposure when it's high noon, you can get significant amounts of vitamin D that way. But if your vitamin D is very low, you might need megadoses of a supplement to get it up first, because it'll take too much sun exposure. You don't want to get the sunburn. It'll take too much sun exposure to try to get it up. So we've gone through NEW or NEWS, and so the next T is temperance. And studies are showing no alcohol, no tobacco, no marijuana, no sugar is an important aspect of treating infections, and of course no technology that wastes time. We'll get into that here in a little bit. And then fresh air is also important. Subjects taking 2-hour walks in the woods over a 2-day period exhibited a 50% increase in levels of natural killer cells. This is the body's innate immunity from monocytes. By the way, if you get a complete blood count and you want to see what your innate immunity is like, it's very much connected to your monocyte population. And if you have a good immunity, you should see monocytes well above 10%. And that's a good indicator that you're going to have enough innate immunity. If your innate immunity is down, the COVID infection becomes more overwhelming, and that's when that big cytokine storm hits about 5 to 7 days later, in producing all of this scarring of the lungs and all of that sort of thing that can end up in death. One of the forest bathing products that can happen if you have this around is eucalyptus. There have been studies on eucalyptus showing that it actually puts monocytes on alert, gets them very alert in regards to fighting infections. Several studies show amazing benefit in turning your innate immunity against scores of other viruses as well, and now it's been shown to be helpful for SARS-2. Interestingly, Ellen White talked about eucalyptus oil. She wouldn't utilize much, just a drop or two, and she tells you, if you look it up in her writings, she'll tell you exactly how she did it. And she said whenever she got cough or congestion, she would do this, and it would go away within hours. Now we know the powerful effect it can have from studies. And then when we get to rest, studies show people who don't get quality sleep or enough sleep are more likely to get sick after being exposed to a virus. Lack of sleep can also affect how fast you recover if you do get sick. And melatonin is one of the protective elements. We talked about antioxidants, vitamin A, C, and E. Vitamin E is the most potent of those, and melatonin is 30 times more potent than vitamin E. It's one of the reasons why melatonin actually should be utilized as an agent if you were to come across COVID as well, because its powerful antioxidant effect. It's also anti-inflammatory, and it's an immune modulator, and it decreases the cytokine storm and keeps the integrity of the vascular endothelium up. And we get more melatonin made in our brains by going to bed early and rising early. We even get even more melatonin if we go to bed on an empty stomach, because our gut will actually make a lot of melatonin, and fasting at night when we don't go to bed with a full stomach. So having regular bedtime, no screens for greater than an hour before going to bed. We talked about screens reducing the melatonin peak. I don't think we actually did talk about that last night, but there are studies clearly showing that if you have watched something from a screen, your smartphone or whatever, an hour before going to bed, you actually get less melatonin made that night, in part due to the blue light from the screens. If you're outdoor in sunlight in the daytime, you're also making more serotonin, and that will turn into more melatonin at night. And then sleeping where it's dark enough to get melatonin is also important. And then diet plays a role here too. We need to have enough calcium and B6 to make enough melatonin. But back to this anxiety part of things and what it is doing to the brain. There was a study published by Dr. Harold Koenig from Duke University in the midst of this COVID epidemic that is worth looking at. He says, few, however, understand that the very emotions we are all now experiencing actually increase our susceptibility to the dreaded virus. This is because of the adverse effects on immune functioning that fear, anxiety, and psychological distress cause. He goes on to say that positive emotions have the exact opposite effect on the immune system, as do fear and anxiety. Among Christians, these positive emotions are known as the fruit of the Spirit. And then he actually quotes it in this peer-reviewed review article. Love, joy, peace, forbearance or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and what else? Self-control. Indeed, the first of these, which is love, is known to cast out fear. And then he says the benefits to the immune system of positive emotions, including those generated by sacred scriptures and activities like those above, are backed by a large and growing volume of objective scientific research. And he quotes the researchers, even Brown from 2020. He goes on to say, a large and growing volume of research now documents the benefits of religious faith on immune functioning and vulnerability to infection. What type of infections in particular? Viral infections. So viral infections are particularly helped by religious faith on immune functioning. This research shows that religious involvement is associated with a reduction in pro-inflammatory cytokine levels and an increase in immune functions necessary to resist infections. So we're told by Paul in Colossians to set our affections on what? Things above. When we do that through daily devotions, we're not only helping our spiritual life, we're helping our physical life. We're helping our protection against viruses. Devotions, I think it was seen by many in society that religious involvement was unessential when COVID came. Churches were shut down, and it was seen as non-essential. But when we look at it, actually, as far as protection from the virus, I would say that devotions are essential. And having our affections daily on things above and focusing in on those positive aspects of love and joy and peace can be very healthy. And worshiping God should be seen as an essential part of our life. So I'll close with the third epistle that John put out, where he said, "Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth." And I'll be glad to take any questions at this point.
Hi, Dr. Nedley. I followed one of your videos during the start of the pandemic, and the recommendation for the vitamin C and the D and the zinc, and then you also mentioned NAC. And I did order the NAC but, in the beginning of the pandemic, but a couple of months ago, I tried to reorder to give it to somebody, and it has now been taken off. Can't find it anywhere. Not in the stores and not on the internet. Why is that?
Okay, so N-acetylcysteine is something that your body makes that's a potent antioxidant. And N-acetylcysteine was first shown in the flu, which is also an RNA virus. It was actually a very nice controlled study in Italy that showed that if you have 1,200 milligrams of NAC on board in a supplemental form, if you were to come across the flu, over 75% of people will not even know that they even had a cold, but they'll develop antibodies to it, meaning that their body fights it off so effectively you have zero symptoms. And so with COVID being an RNA virus, it was thought to be helpful, and we've had a lot of evidence that the NAC also helps with COVID virus. So, but it can also help with a lot of other things. NAC, we use it in mental health. 2,400 milligrams a day has been shown to be very helpful for obsessive compulsive disorder, for instance, and trichotillomania. It can be actually used in emergency rooms if you were to come in with Tylenol poisoning, because it protects your liver with its high antioxidant level against any of the liver demise that would occur without N-acetylcysteine. So yeah, I was very curious when the FDA stated their intentions of taking this off the market, like, has there been a problem? There's been no problems with NAC. The argument that was used was, we are going to consider taking NAC off the market because we're fearful that some people will take NAC instead of getting the vaccine. And so if we take this away, we might encourage people to get more of the vaccine. Is that a good reason for taking a natural substance off the market? It really isn't, but fortunately, it's not been completely taken off. The ones who are in bed with the FDA and government today are the technology companies. So Amazon immediately took it off. Any of those big companies took it off. Nedley Health has not taken it off. And so you can still get it out of Nedley Health. I don't know how much it'll cost to ship to Guam, but we'll do it at the cheapest price possible. And there are other places I think you can still get it from. So it's a natural substance. It's going to be very hard for them to have a good enough reason to exclude it from everybody. But they have stated their intentions, and the big tech and big organizations all followed suit to remove it from the market. But yeah, good question. All right, yes.
I want to know, is a person that's fully vaccinated more likely to be test positive when they are tested for the virus?
If they are fully vaccinated and they come across the virus, is that what you're saying?
Have not been exposed to the virus, but because they got the shot, they are more likely to be tested positive because of what's put into the virus?
I see, just because of the fact that they have virus particles in them from the virus. The answer to that depends on how you are testing them and what you're detecting. So if it's the nuclear antigen test, you have to actually have a whole sequence of the virus. And what is being, the Moderna and Pfizer, all they're giving you is the RNA that makes the spike protein only. And so that would not be enough to turn you into positivity. The PCR are looking for a whole sequence of the virus as well. Johnson & Johnson is giving you the whole sequence, or not the whole sequence, it's giving you a partial sequence, so you'd be more likely to test positive if you got an entire sequence, depending on which method that they're getting. But if you're just getting the spike protein, you should not be testing positive after getting the vaccine.
Hi, Dr. Nedley. Welcome back to Guam.
Thank you.
I was at the seminar when you were here a few years ago, and we were blessed, and we're blessed again. I just want to ask you your thought on this. And so I have a 13-year-old nephew who took the vaccine a few months ago, and now he's experiencing heart problems. He's pretty active, no underlying conditions, and he's pretty healthy.
So there is a heart problem that can come about from COVID and also come about from the vaccine called myocarditis. And it tends to occur more in younger males in particular. By the way, males are also more likely to succumb to COVID than females are. There's a gender disadvantage when it comes to the COVID virus that seems to be pro-feminism. But in regards to myocarditis, it is younger males that tend to come across it. I don't know if it was, you said heart problems, but you didn't specify. Myocarditis is when the muscle itself gets weak, and so you can run up with symptoms of congestive heart failure, but it can also affect the electrical system of the heart as well.
I believe it's inflammation of his heart.
Yeah, so inflammation of the heart is myocarditis. And this is one of the reasons why it's controversial to be vaccinating, everyone and all of the kids and those sorts of things well, in part due to the fact that the immune system of children is so much better, and they're not succumbing unless they're having a lot of comorbidities, which children today can. There can be children that are diabetic and that are overweight and all those sorts of things. But where we've had some specific issues is, of course, in this broad mandate. And really the mandate is irrational to have it to be, broadly put on everybody, no matter what their background and their underlying condition is. And particularly when you take a look at if they've had COVID, where the mandate really doesn't make sense is someone who has already had COVID and has natural immunity to it, to force that individual to go through a vaccine that might have some complications. And anytime we get a foreign substance, this is what, although I did take the vaccine and it is protective, I would have never taken the vaccine had COVID not been around, and it's going to come to us eventually at some point, because these foreign proteins, the more foreign proteins we have introduced into us, the greater the chance that we're going to have complications like autoimmunity or something like that. And I had to look at apples and apples. I wasn't looking at COVID vaccine versus no vaccine. I had to look at COVID vaccine versus actually getting COVID, because eventually that's what's going to happen. And COVID has 29 foreign proteins. The vaccine, if it's Pfizer and Moderna, has 1 foreign protein. Which one do you think is more likely to develop long-term symptoms? Getting 1 foreign protein or 29 foreign proteins? Obviously 29 foreign proteins. So this is why we're seeing long-haul COVID that's pretty frequent. Up to a third of individuals are having long-term complications from their COVID. It's far less than that in getting the vaccine, because you only have 1 of those foreign proteins. So in making that decision, I had to do that. But if I would have been 13 years old and healthy and realized that there's a chance of myocarditis and all of that, it's far less likely that the 13-year-old's going to run into problems. And the vaccine is coming. They might be able to at least avoid those 29 foreign proteins, for a year or two, and they still can be young enough and healthy enough, if they don't have other comorbid conditions, to be able to go through it. And so those are things that we ought to educate people on in regards to whether to get it or not. But to just mandate it for everybody I would just call it a government overreach, is what I would call it.
Go ahead, just Ruth.
Yes.
Can you speak to sleeping in the dark versus having light on in your room?
Yeah, if you have a light on in your room, it does inhibit your melatonin production at night. And it's also, some people sleep with the TV on, for instance. That's also going to inhibit their melatonin production at night, even with their eyes closed. Now, you can have a very dim light, like 1 lux light. We actually utilize in our program for depression and anxiety recovery, where sleep is very important. We, of course, have them get the light box in the morning so that they'll get that serotonin in. But at night, we have them plug in this 1 lux light so they don't have to turn on the lights to go to the bathroom at night. And even that can help be helpful for them to get more rest and rejuvenation at night by keeping the room relatively dark. So that's about where moonlight is at. And so moonlight is not enough to do it, but a regular light is enough to shut down that melatonin production to at least some extent.
I have a question here. Can you speak of the role of the 800,000 common environmental chemicals that everybody's being exposed to right now worldwide in suppressing the immune system and making people more vulnerable to every microorganism that's out there, including all the different types of viruses, including COVID-19.
Okay, I missed a part of your question. 800,000 what? That's what I missed.
Can you speak of the role of the common 800,000 chemicals that people are being exposed to worldwide?
Yeah, I still missed the word after 800,000.
Chemicals?
Oh, chemicals.
Chemicals
Okay.
that people are being exposed to worldwide that are known to depress people's immune systems, including their innate immune systems, and making them more vulnerable to any microorganism that's out there, including all the different types of viruses, including COVID-19.
Yeah, so there are toxins that can be immune suppressant and can also be neuroimmune suppressant. And so, and there's a number of toxins, huge amounts. Mercury is one of them, by the way, and mercury is unfortunately present in even the pristine waters around Guam and the fish that are gotten here. And fish used to be a healthy way to get your omega-3. It's not anymore because of the fish is the most toxic food now available. And it's not just mercury, but a number of other toxins that can be present in there and could be an issue in regards to that. And of course, there are other ones as well. And yes, we definitely want to be on a diet to avoid as many toxins as possible, and certainly want to be in an environment where we can avoid the unnecessary consumption or exposure to toxins. Yes, there's a question. I guess when you raise your hand, you want to get the attention of the microphone guy because he's the one controlling things here. But I think there's one coming forward for the question here in the front.
Thank you so much for your ministry, Dr. Nedley. It's been very special to people all around the world. I have a question. I'm not anti-vaccine, but I'm hearing about this graphene in the vaccine and metals and something about fetal tissues being involved in this vaccine and that it changes your DNA situation. And even magnetism, where with the 5G going on, can they zap you with this from a distance? I mean, again, these are just different things that we're hearing, and when we research, there's a lot of things behind the scene. My concern is the DNA, which it's a stamp from the Lord in our temple. Does it really change the DNA structure? And is graphene really poisonous? And what is it doing in the vaccine if it is? And all these metals that they're finding, and especially with the boosters, the more you get, the more metals you have. And there's a lot of electricity going around us. And with this 5G situation, there's a lot of induction current in our surroundings. So I just thought if you can comment a little bit about that.
Okay. So several questions there. The first is on the DNA. And unfortunately, the RNA viruses, and messenger RNA and other RNA viruses do not make it in the nucleus. The nucleus is where the DNA is at. And so there are DNA vaccines, but none of these vaccines are DNA vaccines because it's not a DNA virus. And so the reports that it was changing the genetics is just not true. So we don't have to worry about that. In regards to some of the other things, in some of the development of the vaccines, and some more than others, there was fetal tissue that was used early on in the development of some RNA vaccines and some messenger RNA vaccines. The mRNA, actually, I would have not predicted, prior to this vaccine development, that the vaccine would have been very worthwhile as it has been shown to be, because RNA vaccines in general have been not very good. Even the flu virus is not that great. And HIV was an RNA, and they tried all sorts of things, and they never could get a good vaccine against HIV. But where this vaccine came from was not from the infectious disease people. In fact, the infectious disease people, I wish to say that they're better than they have been. Actually, some of the ID people, when they came out with the flu vaccine, were far better in targeting that flu, and they have subsequently retired. And they're actually not as good in coming up with it as they have been. But it wasn't the infectious disease people that came up with the vaccine. It was actually the cancer people that came up with the vaccine. And one of the newest forms of cancer therapy is called immunotherapy, where you find out what foreign protein is being exhibited by that cancer cell, and you're designing a vaccine specifically for that patient. And of course, it's very expensive, but it's highly effective in certain types of cancer. And so, and those are called mRNA vaccines. And the mRNA vaccine, unlike the other vaccines where you have to have a whole sequence, you can just get it down to one particle. And they chose to get it down to the spike protein because the spike is what makes it very infectious and also suppresses the immune system and things like that. So it wasn't the ID people, it was the cancer people that came up with it. And although the original mRNA did involve fetal tissue, this particular vaccine wasn't, they didn't have fetal tissue. In fact, there was no, I don't know if you're aware, but they did not actually utilize any type of animal or other types of tissue. Because of the emergency use, they actually put it directly into human beings, which are people like you and me, that they utilize. So there was no fetal experimentation, there was no fetal tissue used in that process. And then thirdly, in regards to metals, and yes, there are preservatives in the vaccines. One of them that's not in the vaccine is mercury, but mercury used to be in a lot of vaccines. And people were very wanting to stay away from vaccines because of the mercury level. But those same people did not realize that the amount of mercury in that vaccine was far less than what you would get in one fish consumed from the ocean. So they had no problems eating a whole lot of fish, but they weren't going to get that vaccine. And so sometimes we have to major in majors and not, major in minors and those sorts of things. There are some preservatives in there. We could react to some of those preservatives, but they're not to the appreciable point where they're actually going to be broadly suppressing our immune system. And we're actually not seeing that. In the data, when you look at it, the concern was, by getting this vaccine, you're going to be more susceptible to all sorts of other infections. We're actually not seeing that. People that are getting the vaccine aren't getting infections at higher rates in other areas than people that are not getting the vaccine. And so, although we want it to be as pure and clean as possible, I don't think those are major issues. In regards to the 5G, and those sorts of things, I think we talked about a little bit last night with the electromagnetic frequency and those sorts of things. Yes, there is some there. Is this a broad, across-the-board health concern? It's not to the level of the things that I just talked to you about in New Start. New Start is majoring in majors. When we start going away from New Start, we find out that when we spend a whole lot of time doing those sorts of things, it's that might have some minor effects, but not to the effects that we've just mentioned. But
last follow-up, Doctor. I heard early treatment can solve a lot of solutions to the death rate. And then I heard there's over 200 protocols until you get to that incubation period, which is, they put the oxygen thing before they really do anything about it. But it's not really promoted, the early treatment part. And then they take a lot of this early treatment methods to off the shelves. Is a concern, or
well, that is a major concern, and that is majoring in majors. What happens today if someone comes across COVID and they're tested positive? I'll repeat the question. The question was, what about early treatment measures and ignoring some of these early treatment measures? And that is largely ignored. If someone tests positive for COVID, in general, they're told to go home and do nothing and hope that they don't get sick enough to go to the hospital.
Exactly.
And there's plenty of things they can do. Obviously, I just went through a whole lot of them that you can do. You need to make sure that you've got vitamin D. You've got to make sure that you've got those antioxidants. You want to make sure you're doing your contrast hydrotherapy. You want to maybe even get eucalyptus or something like that. There's a lot of different things that we can do. Getting even melatonin at that point. If you're not sleeping, at least get the melatonin. If you're sleeping too much from cough. So there's a lot of things that we can do in that early stage that can take that, because 10% of people get admitted to the hospital. If we can change that 10% down to like 2%, I mean, that's incredibly a positive. And there's no question we could do better at that instead of just telling them to go home and just hope for the best. All right, I'm getting a lot more questions, but I know we had to also cut it short. 2 more questions is what I'm told. So I'll let the microphone distributor decide who wins the lottery here.
Earlier that I came in online, and I'm sorry, it's a twofold question, if you don't mind. Question is it safe for children ages 5 to 12 to get vaccinated? And what are the chances of adverse effects on a healthy child if they were to be vaccinated?
So the question is back in the children area. And this is, as I mentioned, the children that don't have comorbidities are at very low risk for this disease. I have grandchildren, and my 1-year-old granddaughter got COVID a week ago, and she had a fever to 100.6 and was sick for 6 hours. And it was gone. No sign of it thereafter. This is what happens to young children that have healthy immune systems. It's not that big of an issue, and they don't have the risk of the long hauler COVID as much. And so, but the argument on the other side is, well, eventually they're going to come across these 29 foreign sequences, foreign proteins, and you're going to put one foreign protein in there to do it. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. If it was just 29 versus 1, it seems like it would definitely favor them getting the vaccine. But what's happening is when they get that 1, they still end up developing antibodies to some extent against the 29 others when they do come across it. And so they might still develop long hauler COVID symptoms despite the vaccine, probably less of a chance because we already have our antibodies ready to go against the spike. But I'm not a pediatrician, let me state that. I'm not a pediatric expert in this field. But what I would state is it just seems to be a significant overreach to mandate every child to get this vaccine down to whatever age they're going to put it in, just because of the different dynamics that are present in healthy young children versus unhealthy adults. All right, I think that's
okay. I was the second one.
Okay.
What is your recommendation in regards to monoclonal antibody treatment, and if you don't mind expressing the risks versus the benefits of getting the vaccine? I know you spoke on that a little bit already, but just
so monoclonal antibody is an early treatment that can help. They won't allow everybody to get it. There's restrictions on it. But if you have comorbidities and you come across COVID within the first 5 days, then it's clear that it can be helpful. However, if you've had COVID for 7 days and you come in and get monoclonal antibody, it seems to make the situation worse because of that cytokine storm. So it's the early treatment of monoclonal antibody within those first 5 days. And so that's why they've restricted it to the 5-day usage. It isn't because they're just trying to restrict it in general, but if you have someone with comorbidities by day 7 or 8, the early research on the monoclonal antibodies showed not only no improvement versus not getting it, but it showed worsening of it. So we want to get those antibodies quicker if at all possible. The second question was the benefits versus the risk of getting the vaccine. I would say that if you're on a healthy New Start program, your risks of getting the vaccine vaccine are significantly less than your risks of getting COVID. But if you're not on a healthy New Start program and you have advanced atherosclerotic plaques like Hank Aaron, you could be walking to an early grave by not being on New Start first and getting a reason for inflammation and then getting those ulcerated plaques as a result. Hope that makes sense.
Doc, one last question, if you don't
Okay,
mind.
we have
Thank you.
one more.
All right. Off the topic of COVID a little bit, on the subject of rest, because you talked about rest with screen time, can you differentiate between sleep and rest? Because I know for someone like myself, I go to sleep rather easily, but differentiating between getting adequate rest when you still have screen time up until you go to sleep versus sleeping versus rest type of.
Okay. Well, that's a good question. And rest has benefits, particularly if you're resting in the dark, even if you're not sleeping. A lot of people don't realize that, but if you're in a dark room and you've had enough serotonin that day, you're going to make melatonin whether you sleep or not. And that melatonin can have some significant advantages. Now, having said that, there are significant advantages of going through the entire sleep cycle. You know, we get into delta wave sleep. That deep sleep actually does help to wash out some of the byproduct toxins of all of your neuronal activity that day. It's actually like a washing machine type of effect with vascular dilatation and contraction. And so that's why we feel refreshed after sleep, because we've got all of those byproducts removed. There's advantages of having REM sleep with the frontal lobe of the brain. That's where we go through our dreaming and rapid eye movement sleep. So I don't want to underemphasize the benefits of sleep. And of course, if we don't use screens, as mentioned, we're more likely to improve our sleep latency. We're more likely to have more melatonin. And so that's why we would avoid that either way. But a lot of people minimize the effects and they get really bent out of shape if they're laying there and not sleeping. And I have to tell them it's not good to get up and walk around and turn the lights on and just get frustrated that way. It's actually good to just lay there, find a comfortable position and hold it, and chances are you will go to sleep. If you're having trouble sleeping, however, after 3 times, our normal instruction is find a comfortable position and hold it for 20 minutes. You're much more likely to sleep than when you toss and turn. But after 3 times, if it's an hour and you haven't fallen asleep, then use a dim light to read out of a book until you have a micro sleep. A micro sleep is when your eyes are wide open, but you realize you lost time of what was happening. Some of you that have been tired driving down the road, you might have a micro sleep, your eyes are wide open, but you realize for a microsecond you were not in control of that wheel. That's actually a dangerous thing. People try to fight that and say, oh, I'm going to try to stay awake. No, you are going to end up going to sleep with that. And so as soon as you have your first micro sleep after reading the scriptures or reading something that's positive, devotional material, then you turn that light out and you're going to be asleep within 5 minutes after the micro sleep. Well, it's been very great being with you here in Guam. And I hope this has been helpful to you, and I want to wish you all the best of health of body, mind, and soul. Thank you very much.